What's up everyone, it's Victon here with another Path of Exile build guide. Today we're going to be covering a full Spectre Necromancer build for all in-game content in Heist League. Now, I've tested out almost all of the new Heist Spectres at this point, as well as all of the old favorites, and have come down to two top Spectres right now for in-game maps and boss killing. As you could tell in the build showcase, this guide specifically will be covering the Syndicate Operative Spectres. I do have a guide coming out for the top 5 Spectres in Heist League, so if you're interested in that, check out my channel. Before we get into the guide though, if you end up enjoying this guide or any of my other mini Path of Exile guides, throw a like on the video and subscribe for more content just like this. Also, if you're really enjoying these guides and want to support the channel, check the video's description for a link to my Patreon, where you can support the channel and gain access to my community Discord, where we chat about these builds and I can help you out specifically with your character by doing a build/character review. Anyways, moving on to the guide itself, we're going to start off by going over the skill tree, and then discuss our gem setups, and then we're going to cover the gear that we're going to be using, and lastly I'll give my final thoughts on the build and the Syndicate Operative Spectres versus other top tier Spectres right now. So without further ado, let's go ahead and move on into the skill tree. Alright, so first things first here, we're going to be using the desktop app Path of Building. A link's going to be in the description for you to download it if you don't already have it. And it's very important to note that you'll get an error in your Path of Building if you are not using the Path of Building I have linked in the description. It's the community fork Path of Building, and it's updated more frequently, and overall it's just much better than the original. Once you get it, just copy the POB pastebin link in the description in this video, and then open up the app. Go to the top left here and click Import, Export Build, and then click Import from Pastebin, and then paste the link into here, and click Import, and you should be good to go. So the way I do my Path of Buildings is I typically have a leveling guide kind of built in, so you can see how to level it up from start to your first lab, all the way up until a level 96-ish character. So to start, we're first going to head up and grab these minion damage nodes, which also come with a bit of duration, which help our skeletons stay up longer. You're going to be using the skeleton zombie combo either in a 4 or 6 link tabula rasa until you get your specters up at level 28. You have skeletons, zombies, melee splash, melee physical, and minion damage and predator. From these minion damage nodes, you're going to head over and grab some more life and then an extra zombie and skeleton. After that, we just go to the left and pick up some minion life first and then life for ourselves. You'll eventually spec out of that minion life wheel, but it's great for leveling up. After that, we make our way to picking up our first +1 to maximum Spectre. Now for our Spectres, like I mentioned earlier, this build focuses on cold damage dealing Spectres, and specifically the Syndicate Operatives. You won't however be able to summon this yourself until you find him in a June mission later on in maps. Good news though, if you join Global Chat 820 by typing in /global820, you can actually ask if anyone has the Syndicate Operatives, and someone will always invite you to the party. You're just going to go into their hideout and start desecrating, and you could take one of theirs. I'd suggest doing this method and start using those operatives right away at level 28. If you can't get a hold of one of these early on, no worries, you can always just use Flame Sentinels, which can be found in Act 3, the Battlefront zone, and then switch to Slave Drivers when you get to Act 5, the Control Block zone. And finally, once you get to Act 8, the Lunaris Concourse Zone, you can go ahead and switch over to using Frost Sentinels. You'll use those Frost Sentinels until you can finally get a hold of the Syndicate Operatives. But again, this is mainly only for solo self-found folks, because everyone else should be able to ask in Global Chat and someone will always be there to help you out. Now, once we get that Max Spectre, which brings us to 2 at this point, we first grab Avatar of Fire, and then Elemental Equilibrium. Now, the reason that we do this is so our Frost Bomb, which debuffs enemies with cold exposure, will also now only deal fire damage, so we combo that with Elemental Equilibrium to further debuff them, giving them an additional -50 to max cold resistance. This is actually a crazy amount of damage, but make sure you pick up that Avatar of Fire for it to work properly. From there, we just pick up some life, and some more life, and then we get some mana reservation so we can start running our support skill on one of our auras, which I'll go over more in the gem setup section. From there, we're going to get some additional minion damage. After that, finish out that minion damage wheel and start grabbing some more life by going down this way right here. Now from there, we start heading downward and pick up a great minion damage wheel, and we also pick up our first 2 jewel sockets. If you're leveling up and already have currency and can buy the unique jewel Unending Hunger, go ahead and throw it in this jewel socket here. This jewel is amazing for clear speed for your build, but it is a bit pricey, coming in at about 3 exalts. You could also just get a minion jewel like this, a bit of life, Minion damage deal X% increased damage if you've used a minion skill recently, and a bit of minion cold or physical damage. From there, we just get some nice life below by picking up Constitution. And moving on from there, we've finally made it out of Act 10 and into maps, so we drop the minion life wheel and pick up some more life for ourselves. Next, we get even more life for ourselves, as well as cannot be stunned, which is a great defensive layer. And from there, we pick up the shield nodes and glancing blows. Yes, this has been nerfed and isn't as good as it used to be, but comboed with the shield that gives us 5% life gain on hit when you block, it is still a pretty decent combo. And it also gives us some nice resistances along the way in that little wheel. We'll go over it more in the gear section, but basically don't take these nodes until you have a shield that has recover 4 to 5% life gain on block. Lastly, from there, we're going to head up and grab our first and only large cluster jewel. With these jewels, we're going to look for ideally the following 3 passives, and in this order of importance: Renewal, Vicious Bites, and Feasting Fiends. The jewel will get more expensive the more of these passives you have on it, so just go off of your personal budget here when upgrading. We also pick up our first medium cluster jewel, which will eventually have 2 of the exact same thing. For our medium clusters, we want the following 2 passives: Vengeful Commander and First Among Equals. These gives our hatred auras a huge buff, and since our operatives gain a ton of damage from hatred by double dipping from converting 100% of our physical damage into cold damage, this turns out to be a really strong cluster. Ideally, you'd also want 6 passive clusters instead of the typical 4, because the aura effectiveness ends up being quite a bit of extra damage. And finally, we just finish out those medium cluster jewels and added one more jewel socket over here, which I personally use for helping me get resistance capped. Now for our anointment, we will be anointing our amulet with Ravenous Horde. It's a pretty cheap anoint and gives us some great additional damage. And for our ascendancy, we are going with the Necromancer, which is the clear winner for us. We start out by picking up Mindless Aggression for some additional minion damage. Then we grab Unnatural Strength, which is a ton of damage, by giving our minions +2 to maximum levels. From there, we pick up Commander of Darkness, which helps us and our minions with elemental resistances and gives us a bit of damage. Lastly, we pick up Bone Barrier for a free 2.2k shield every 5 seconds. We also put this on our left click, so it automatically gets cast as we run around. This node also comes with some great defensive bonus by giving us 10% physical damage reduction and some additional life regen recovery rate. And that is it for our skill tree and ascendancy, so let's go ahead and move on to our gem setup. So our main skill here is of course Raise Spectre, but we have 2 options on how we want to do this. You could either get a 6-link chest and put everything in there, or you could go the expensive route and get a helmet with +3 to maximum Spectre level, hypothermia, and minion damage. The helmet versions ends up being more damage in a min-max build, but again it's way more expensive, so pick up whichever you can afford in your current budget. For the 6-link option, we're going to go with Raise Spectre, minion damage, elemental damage with attacks, greater multiple projectiles, vicious projectiles, and spell echo. Now you might be thinking, that's weird having attack and spell supports in the same links, but the way the Syndicate Operatives works is it fires spells which then trigger attacks. So we're going to use spell echo so more attacks come out, and then we scale up the base attacks as much as possible for maximum DPS. Now if you're using the helmet version, you're going to want Raise Spectre, greater multiple projectiles, spell echo, and weapon elemental damage with attacks. Now our body armor, we're also going to have 2 versions here based on if you're using the helmet or your 6-link for your Spectres. If you use a 6-link for your Spectres, then you'll want to put in your helmet Raise Zombie, Animate Guardian, Feeding Frenzy, and Elemental Army. If you use the Raise Spectre in your helmet, then you're going to get to use a 6-link body armor for the following: Raise Zombie, Animate Guardian, Elemental Army, Feeding Frenzy, Meat Shield, and Minion Life. This setup makes your support minions very tanky and will make them very rarely ever die. For your gloves, you're going to have Dash, Second Wind, Sniper's Mark, and Phase Run. Now, Sniper's Mark here is huge. This gives your operatives a crazy amount of damage, so don't forget to add this into your setup. I personally have this in my right click slot and use it to sort of help guide my Spectres on what to attack. For our boots, we're going to have Hatred, Generosity, and Summon Skitterbots linked to a Bone Chill, which makes enemies take more cold damage. This is why it's important to make sure you take that Wheel of Mana reservation on the tree. It helps us run this Bone Chill support. And for our shield, we're going to have Frost Bomb, Hex Touch, and Frostbite. all of which is helping shred the enemy's cold resistance as much as possible. We also do have an unset ring with Convocation in it. And lastly, we have a trigger setup in our wand with Desecrate, Flesh Offering, and Stormbrand. Stormbrand, of course, being here to help proc Elemental Equilibrium alongside our Frostbomb. Make sure your weapon gets the Benchcraft that triggers a socketed spell when you use a skill. And that's it for our gem setup, so let's go ahead and move on to our gear. Alright, so for our gear, there's a few very important items here that really makes the Syndicate Operatives go above and beyond other Spectres. We're going to want to pick up the Triad Grip gloves, and 4-socket them with green sockets. This converts 100% of our Spectre's physical damage into cold damage, which is why all of this cold resistant shredding is so important. It makes enemies take so much more damage by converting to cold and then shredding cold resistance on the enemies. This is very good to pick up and doesn't cost that much. Now, quick tip here is you can use a trick to get 4 green sockets here, even though the base item should mainly only be getting red and blue sockets. We're going to take it to the crafting bench, and then we're going to use the 2-socket recipe first, and then we're going to use the 2 green socket recipe, and then we're going to alternate between 3-socket and 2-socket recipe until our 3rd socket turns into a green socket. And then we're going to repeat the same process using the 3-socket and 4-socket recipe until the 4th socket is also green. This should save you a ton of currency since we're only going to be using Jeweler's Orbs here instead of hundreds of Chromatic Orbs for 4 off colors. Moving on to our amulet, we are going to be picking up a Jinxed Juju. This is a fantastic and cheap amulet. This gives you some nice chaos resistance, an increased hatred aura effect, as well as a general 10% damage reduction by making your Spectres take that damage instead of you. And again, make sure you anoint Ravenous Horde on this. For a belt, we do have a unique belt here, the Torrent's Reclamation. It's by far the best in-slot belt, giving our Spectres a ton more move, cast, and attack speed, as well as giving us some movement speed as well, which is going to help our overall map clear speed. It's a bit pricey though, coming in at 11 to 12 exalts, so a cheaper option could be a Darkness Enthroned, which amplifies the Abyss jewels inside of it. We're going to use 2 jewels like this. For some life, minions deal additional damage when you've used a minion skill recently, and added cold damage, or you could use added minion physical damage as well, which would technically be better. For our boots, we pick up a pair with the main stat being +1 to level of Erase Spectre gems. Try and get life and move speed on them as well, but they are a bit rare and can be costly when you get tons of stats on them alongside that +1 to Spectre gems. For our rings, we get some basic rings with lots of dexterity and life, as well as some elemental resistances, and ideally on an unset ring, so we can use it for Convocation, and even if you get a second unset ring, you could use that one for a portal gem if you want. I'd also suggest bench crafting +1 to minimum endurance charges for some nice additional defenses. Moving on to our shield, like I mentioned earlier, we want to pick one up that has 4 to 5% of our maximum life recovered on block. We end up getting about 63% chance or so to block after we get Glancing Blows on the skill tree, and about 75% and 36% of spell block when you have a Rumi's Concoction up. So anytime you block, you recover that amount of life, and it's happening quite frequently, so you're getting a lot of life back. It's not as good as it used to be, but it is still pretty good. And also on the shield, I'd suggest high life and resistances if you can get them, but that's going to come down to your budget. Another option would be to go for Necromantic Aegis on the skill tree, which makes your minions get your shield's stats. You could then give them frenzy and power charges using a Victorio's Charity, or even a beefy cold damage shield with say 10% of cold damage as extra chaos damage, or +2 to minimum frenzy and power charges, or throw in a ton of cold and spell damage. There's quite a few damage options here that would make your operatives do more damage, but for me, I personally tested all of this and preferred getting the shield stats for myself, which gave me a lot of survivability. In the end, I found that dying less was worth more to me than my Spectres doing a bit more damage. For our weapon, we ideally want one with +1 to all spell skills and +1 to all minion gems, alongside some minion damage or minion attack speed, and then of course the benchcraft for tricking spells. A wand like this will be the most expensive or second most expensive item in your build outside of your helmet if you opt to go for that route. I personally only use a +1 to level of all spell skill gems with no minion damage or attack speed, but I did have the trigger spell craft on it, and that's what you saw in the beginning gameplay showcase. It was perfectly fine to kill Deathless Cyrus 8 and clear 100% Delirious maps for tier 16. Obviously with a better wand, you'll just kill those bosses and finish those maps a whole lot faster, but it just goes to show that these Spectres are powerful enough to not need those super expensive items right off the bat to be strong. Moving on to our body armor, we really just want one with +1 to maximum Spectres. This is huge and makes us go from having 4 Spectres to 5, so effectively 25% more damage. I picked up a very basic one on a 6-link astral plate with 3 blue sockets and 3 white sockets for 3.5 exalts. And then I added life with my benchcraft and could dual mod and craft 8% maximum life as well if I wanted to, so not such a bad armor for the price. Lastly, and what I've held off until the end, is the big boy helmet. Again, you don't have to do this if you can't afford it. You can just use that 6-link body armor in the meantime and be completely fine. But ideally, you do want a helmet like this, with +3 to minion levels, minion damage, and hypothermia. You can either buy these for 30 to 50 exalts, or you can craft them yourself for anything between 15 and 20 exalts, by using a base helmet of item level 86 or higher, and then combining Elder and Shaper onto it with an Awakener Orb, and then using Bound and Frigid Fossils. I kid you not, I made this helmet on my very first Bound Frigid Fossil attempt. My luck for the league has been expended. It's never that easy. Like I said, expect to spend at least 15 to 20 exalts on this if you craft it yourself, or 30 plus if you buy it straight up. In the end though, it comes out to be much more damage than the 6-link chest, so for min-maxing, this helmet is the way to go. Now for our flasks, we have a pretty basic setup here. We run a Rumi's Concoction Granite Flask, which is huge for our block chance, and a Blood of the Karui for our Life Flask, but you could just go with a regular Divine Life Flask of Staunching for bleed immunity if you'd prefer. And then we have a Jade Flask with Curse immunity, a Quicksilver Flask with more movement speed or freeze immunity, and a Quartz Flask with bleed immunity. And that is it, guys. That is the full build for a Spectre Necromancer. Overall, I did have a blast on this build. It's always fun playing Spectre builds, and I always enjoy them quite a bit. I'd say that these Syndicate Operatives turn out to be extremely strong, and possibly even better than the pre-nerf Redemption Sentries from previous leagues. I did have a few issues with them though. Their AI is some of the worst for Spectres in the game. Sometimes they just kind of stand there and do absolutely nothing, or they're going to run up to a boss and start auto-attacking it, essentially doing 0 damage, and you end up having to convocate them to position them so often in order to get them to actually have a spot where they can do maximum DPS. It does kind of get a bit annoying, I must admit. Even with that being said though, their clear speed is the best out of all of the Spectres right now, I'd say, so that makes up for it a bit. Their boss damage is probably number 2 right now, and I'd only say that because of their positioning issues. Once you get them positioned right, they are the clear winner, but you won't always be in that perfect position, and it eats away at their damage uptime. Like I said in the beginning though, I am releasing a video on the top 5 Spectres in Heist League, so if you're interested in that, I'll give you a quick spoiler. There is a Spectre out there that I'd say is right up here with the Syndicate Operatives, and I'd actually say I prefer them in general over the Operatives. Their clear speed is pretty much the same, and their boss damage is actually slightly less, but they don't have that awful AI that the Operatives have, so their damage uptime is higher, and thus just makes for a smoother experience overall. Do check out that video if you're curious what Spectre it is. And that's all I got for this one, guys. If you end up enjoying this video, like it and subscribe for more guides just like this. Also consider becoming a Patreon and supporting the channel. I'd be happy to help you out in my Discord and personally help you out with your build. Anyways, thanks everyone, and I will see you all in the next one.